Hi friends, welcome back. Today we are going to discuss a very small topic. It is in cardiology called as Frank-Starling mechanism. Okay, so this Frank-Starling mechanism, the heading indicates it is intrinsic regulation of heart pumping. So this Frank-Starling mechanism tells about the intrinsic regulation of heart pumping. Okay, so coming to the definition, the intrinsic ability of the heart to adapt to increasing volumes of inflowing blood is called the Frank-Starling mechanism of the heart, and named in honor of Otto Frank and Ernest Starling, two great physiologists. So what he is conveying here is the intrinsic ability of the heart to adapt to increasing volumes of inflowing blood. So the ability of the heart to adapt to continuous inflow of volume of blood is called the Frank-Starling mechanism. Okay, we know that heart receives continuous flow of blood from various parts of the body, from above superior and below so whenever heart is receiving the particular quantity of blood, there is no problem. But whenever large amount of blood is coming, so like when we are running and we are doing any exercise, more amount of blood will be pumped into the heart. Okay, again from the heart the blood should be pumped out into the aorta to get distributed to various parts of the body. So how this heart is dealing with this sudden increase in volume of the blood? See, that is what this Frank-Starling want to explain. Okay. See, basically the Frank-Starling mechanism means that the more the heart muscle is stretched during filling, the greater is the force of contraction and greater is the quantity of blood pumped into the aorta. So here it makes very simple that whenever, see, if you take a balloon, right, the amount of water when we are pouring into the balloon increases, the stretching of the balloon also increases. Okay, like the same way the heart also, if the amount of the volume of the blood is increased during filling, the heart also, that muscle of the heart also will start stretching during the filling time. Okay, so whenever there is a stretching, what will happen? It will try to come to its original position with a greater force. Okay, that is contraction. Okay, so whenever there is stretching, once the relaxation phase is completed, the contraction is going to start. The amount it stretched is converted into that much of force with the increase in force of contraction. The increased volume of blood that is filled in the heart during relaxation will be pumped during contraction into the aorta with more amount of force due to more stretching of the heart, more contraction that happened due to more stretching of the heart during relaxation. Understand? That's it. See, can state stated another way, within physiological limits, the heart pumps all the blood that returns to it by way of veins. It's a simple way. Within the physiological limits, this is very important, right? See, each and every tissue has specific elastic nature, stretching limit. So like that, muscle of the heart also has a certain threshold for stretching. So okay, so that is called a physiological limit. If you go on stretch it, it will get torn off, right? Like that, the muscle of the heart also, how far it can stretch in the physiological limits, that much okay, the heart muscle will get stretched, and how much ever the heart muscle it gets stretched, that much large volume of blood will be filled in the ventricles. Understand? Once the stretching is over, when the filling of the blood is over, when the contraction phase comes, how much ever it stretched, that is converted into force of contraction, so that the large volume of blood is pumped into the aorta. Okay, this is what Frank Starling want to convey to us. So how this mechanism occurs? So how heart is able to stretch that much and again contract with the force. Okay, so are there any systems helping it? Is there any intrinsic mechanism? When an extra amount of blood flows into ventricles, the cardiac muscle is stretched to a greater length. Okay, what? When extra amount of blood flows. You see, in normal conditions, there is nothing to worry about blood flow, heart will pump, in normal amount of blood is coming, means there is nothing to discuss about this topic. But while running or while doing any exercise or when we are very much anxious, what will happen? The heart rate increases and the amount of blood returned to the heart also will be more due to sympathetic stimulation. So in such conditions, how the heart is able to manage, that is what we want to explain here. So an extra amount of blood flows into the ventricles, the cardiac muscle is stretched to a greater length. Okay. What happens when stretching causes the muscle to contract with increased force because the actin and myosin filaments are brought to a more nearly optimal degree of overlap for force generation. Okay. So here is microscopically what is present in the cardiac muscle. We know that it is made up of actin and myosin filaments. So when heart is stretched to greater length, the overlap of the actin myosin filaments will be more. So once the stretching is over, they try to contract with the more force. Okay, that is what I want to explain. See, the stretching causes the muscle to contract with increased force. What will happen? The stretching causes the muscle again to contract with increased force because the actin myosin filaments are brought to a more nearly optimal degree of overlap for force generation. Okay, yeah. And the second thing is, therefore, the ventricle, because of its increased pumping, automatically pumps the extra blood into the arteries. Okay. This ability of stretched muscle up to an optimal length to contract with increased work output is characteristic of straight muscle and is not simply a characteristic of cardiac muscle. Even not only the cardiac muscle, even the skeletal muscle also, any striated muscle also will have the same property. What is the property? Therefore, because of its increased pumping, automatically pumps the extra blood into the arteries. The ability of stretched muscle up to an optimal length, to contract with increased work output is characteristic of all striated muscle. Okay, it is not only characteristic of cardiac muscle. Understand what you want to say? And coming to the next point. In addition to the important effect of lengthening of the heart muscle, another factor increases heart pumping when its volume is increased. I told you there is second point. Other than lengthening of the heart muscle, there is also another factor that increases heart pumping when its volume is increased. What is that? Stretch of the right atrial wall directly increases the heart rate by 10 to 20%. See this point. Stretch of the right atrial wall, okay, when large volume of blood is pumped into the right atrium, so the right atrium will get stretched out. So when the stretch occurs, it increases the heart rate by 10 to 20%, which also helps increase the amount of blood pumped each minute, although its contribution is much less than that of FRANKSTARLING mechanism. Okay, so another factor how it helps FRANKSTARLING mechanism is that the right atria, when it gets stretched due to increase in volume of the blood, it itself increases the heart rate by 10 to 20%. How it is happening? As we know, stretch of the atrium also activates stretch receptors and a nerve reflex, the brain bridge reflex that is transmitted by the vagus nerve and may increase heart rate an additional 40 to 60%. Okay, so this is another theory how this excess amount of blood is pumped out from the heart by stretch receptors present in the atrium, okay, and the nerve reflex called the brain bridge reflex that is transmitted by the vagus nerve and may increase the heart rate an additional of 40 to 60%. Okay, one is by increasing the heart rate by 10 to 20%. Okay, so whenever the heart rate is increased, the amount of blood pumped each minute will be also increased. Understand? So by these two mechanisms, understand, heart is able to cope with the extra volume of blood that is receiving every minute. Understand? So this is the simple explanation of Frank-Starling mechanism. Here the take home point is, it is nothing but the intrinsic ability of the heart to adapt to increasing volumes of inflowing blood. Okay, it's the ability of the heart to adapt to increasing volumes of inflowing of blood is called the Frank-Starling mechanism. That's it. This much you have to remember. Okay, so how it is happening? One important thing is that whenever extra amount of blood flows into the ventricles, the cardiac muscle is stretched to a greater length. This stretching will create a force, much force, okay, due to overlap of actin myosin filaments, and due to more force of contraction, what will happen? The extra amount of blood that is received will be pumped down due to more force of contraction. Understand? That is developed due to more stretching of the muscle of the heart during relaxation, during inflow of blood. Understand? That's it. And in addition to that, the stretch receptors which are present in the atria increases the heart rate to 10 to 20%. Okay, and again, due to if still there is much amount of blood, what will happen? Through nervous reflex called brain bridge reflex, which is transmitted by vagus nerve, may increase the heart rate to an additional 40 to 60% to rapidly pump the blood away from the heart into the aorta. Okay, so this is a simple explanation of Frank-Starling mechanism. So here we have come across brain bridge reflex. Understand? So I'll tell a little bit about brain bridge reflex also, because it is covered here. So what is this brain bridge reflex? It is nothing but whenever the stretch receptors in the atrium are stimulated, or when there is an increase in venous return from the inferior vena cava, there also some stretch receptors are present both in atrium and also inferior vena cava. So these stretch receptors will send a message to the medulla oblongata through a efferent limb to the medulla oblongata in the center of the brain, and it will process a signal to the vagus nerve through efferent limb to reduce the vagal activity at that time. Okay, so once the vagal activity is reduced, the sympathetic activity will be increased, and once the sympathetic activity is increased, the heart rate will increase. So this process is called brain bridge reflex. So why it is happening this one? Whenever the atrium is stretched out, the receptors present in the atrium and inferior vena cava, when it receives increased venous return, sends a signal via efferent limb to the medulla oblongata in the brain, and there it receives the information and it sends back a signal to the vagus nerve to relax and reduce the vagal activity, and increases the sympathetic nervous system activity, which automatically increases the heart rate. This process is called brain bridge reflex. Understand? Thank you.